Hi, I'm Tyler. Living with my dad and stepmom Janet, along with her two kids, was never easy. But in the beginning, things were at least tolerable. Dad remarried 2 years ago, and at first, Janet seemed fine, distant, but fair. However, it didn't take long for the differences in how she treated her kids and me to become glaringly obvious. It started small. At dinner, her kids would get generous servings, while I'd often be left with what felt like scraps. "Tyler, you're growing too fast. We need to watch your diet," Janet would say, forcing a strained smile. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she had a point. But as Dad started working longer hours, Janet's control over the household tightened, especially over me. One afternoon, I came home starving, dropped my backpack by the sofa, and headed for the kitchen. But Janet was already there, blocking the fridge. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked sharply. "Just grabbing a snack," I replied, trying to keep my tone calm. "I'm starving." Her response was dismissive, her eyes not even meeting mine. "Snacks are for the kids. They have swim practice. You can wait for dinner." As the days turned into weeks, a knot formed in my stomach, not just from hunger, but from the realization that this was my life now. My room became my only sanctuary from her icy stares and suffocating rules. But even there, I couldn't escape the growing sense of isolation. One rare evening, when Dad was home, I tried to talk to him. "Dad, things are different when you're not here. I don't think Janet likes me very much." He barely looked up from his work. "Tyler, Janet's doing her best. Just give it time. Things will get better." But they didn't. He couldn't see what I saw or hear the sharpness in her words. Feeling more alone than ever, I retreated back to my room, listening to the sound of their laughter echo down the hall. Lying on my bed, I wondered how long I could endure this. The hunger was no longer just physical. It gnawed at my heart too, for the warmth and love that had once filled our home before Janet arrived. Things took a darker turn when Janet installed locks on the fridge and pantry. It wasn't gradual. One morning, the kitchen was just off limits unless Janet said otherwise. "You need to earn your meals from now on," she announced, standing in front of the closed kitchen door. "I can't have you taking whatever you want. You'll do extra chores, mow the lawn, wash the cars, clean the garage, or you can give up your allowance." Her kids sat silently eating their breakfast as I stood there, unsure of how to even begin earning something as basic as food. That first week, I worked until I could barely stand. I mowed the lawn until my hands blistered, scrubbed the cars until they sparkled, and organized the garage so meticulously you could eat off the floor. But when I asked for food, Janet would just gesture toward a tiny plate, a meal so small, it hardly lasted me a few hours. I started hiding bits of food whenever I could, crackers, apples, anything that wouldn't spoil too quickly. I stashed it in my backpack, under my bed, inside old shoe boxes. But no matter how hard I tried, it was never enough. My clothes started hanging off me, and I couldn't focus at school. My grades, once a source of pride, began slipping. "Tyler, are you okay?" My teacher, Mrs. Jensen, asked me after class one day when I flunked a test I should have aced. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, avoiding her gaze. I wasn't ready to admit how bad things had gotten, not even to myself. At home, every mealtime became a battleground. Janet's rules grew harsher, and my attempts to meet her demands became increasingly desperate. "You didn't finish washing the windows." "No dinner tonight," she announced one evening, her words slicing through the air. That night, lying in bed, my stomach ached, not just from hunger, but from the emotional weight of living in a home where I had to earn the right to eat. The loneliness was suffocating, my thoughts swirling in a storm of frustration and despair. Each morning, I woke up exhausted, dreading the day ahead. School offered no escape as my declining grades began to draw unwanted attention. "Tyler, you need to apply yourself more," a teacher commented one day, handing me back another test marked in red. But how could I explain that it wasn't a lack of interest, but a lack of food that was dragging my grades down? Every day felt heavier than the last, the weight of my situation pressing down on me until it felt unbearable. Janet's house no longer felt like a home, it was a prison. I found myself counting down the days until I could escape somehow. The weeks blurred into one long stretch of exhaustion and hunger, and then everything changed during what felt like the hardest week of my life. I was slumped over my desk in history class, trying to stay awake and focus, when Mrs. Jensen, my teacher, paused mid-sentence and walked over to me. Her sudden presence snapped me out of my daze. "Tyler, can you stay after class for a moment?" she asked softly, her voice filled with a concern I hadn't heard from anyone in a long time. When the bell rang, my classmates rushed out, but I stayed behind, dreading the conversation I knew was coming. "Tyler, I've noticed you've been really tired lately and your grades have dropped a lot. Is everything okay at home?" Mrs. Jensen's eyes searched mine, her tone gentle but serious. The concern in her voice broke down the wall I'd been holding up for so long. I tried to give her a simple excuse, something that would keep everything hidden. But the words felt hollow. "It's nothing. I just haven't been sleeping well." She sat down next to me, her expression becoming more serious. "Tyler, if something is going on, you can tell me. It's important." That's when everything came pouring out. I told her about the locks on the fridge and pantry, the rationed meals, the endless chores, and the way Janet treated me compared to her own kids. Mrs. Jensen listened to every word, her face growing more concerned with each detail. The very next day, Mrs. Jensen made a call to Child Protective Services, CPS. Within hours, a social worker arrived at school to speak with me. I shared my story again, showing them the faint bruises from the physical strain of the chores and the toll my malnourishment had taken on my body. CPS acted quickly. Later that day, while I was still at school, they paid a visit to my home. I heard about what happened after. Janet was caught completely off guard. Her usual calm, calculating demeanor gave way to defensive anger as she tried to brush off the accusations. "This is nonsense. He's just a lazy boy making up stories because he doesn't want to do his chores," she snapped at the social worker. But the evidence spoke louder than her words. The locks on the fridge and pantry, my near-empty bedroom with hidden stashes of food, and my appearance told a story that was hard to deny. When my dad was called home from work, he was shocked. At first, he couldn't believe it, but as the facts sank in, his disbelief turned to horror. "I had no idea," he whispered, his voice breaking as he looked at me, not just as his son, but as a victim of the woman he had trusted. The betrayal hit him hard. CPS facilitated a tense family meeting where everything was laid bare. Janet's actions, the evidence, and my struggles were out in the open. My dad was torn, devastated by the choice he now had to make between his wife and his son. But in the end, the truth was undeniable. He made the decision to remove Janet from our lives. Divorce proceedings began soon after, and Janet was forced to move out. My dad was overwhelmed with guilt and emotional turmoil, realizing how blind he had been to what was happening under his own roof. He was racked with guilt for not seeing the signs earlier, for letting his work blind him to the reality of our home life. We moved out of the house, taking temporary refuge in a small apartment while we navigated the legal and emotional fallout. One evening, as we sat in our new living room, much smaller and humbler than what we were used to, Dad turned to me, his eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Tyler. I should have been there for you. We'll get through this together." His words, though heavy with regret, held a promise. The hope of healing felt like a faint light at the end of a very dark tunnel. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were finally free from Janet's control, and though the road ahead was uncertain, it was one we would walk together. We started family therapy in the second week at our new place. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Ellis, had a gentle way of drawing out the words we had been too afraid to say. "It's about rebuilding trust," she told us during one session. "Trust in each other and in yourselves." In therapy, we unpacked everything. I talked about the hunger, the loneliness, and the desperation, while Dad shared his guilt and struggle to balance work with family. It was painful, revisiting those dark moments, but with each session, it felt like we were slowly mending something that had been broken for a long time. Gradually, life began to take on a new rhythm. I re-enrolled in school, and with regular meals and less stress, my health improved. My grades climbed back up, and my teachers noticed the change. Mrs. Jensen even stopped by one day with a stack of books she thought I'd enjoy. "Just a little fuel for that brilliant mind of yours," she said with a wink. Dad also made changes. He cut back his work hours to be more present at home. We started cooking together, stumbling through recipes and laughing at our kitchen disasters. In those little moments, I began to see the father I had missed during the hardest times. We also started a new tradition, Sunday walks in the park, just the two of us. Sometimes we walked in silence, sometimes we talked about everything and nothing. It was during one of those walks that Dad stopped, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Tyler, I know I can't change the past, but I promise you this, I will never let you go through anything like that again. We're in this together." It wasn't an instant fix. Some days were harder than others, and the shadows of the past would sometimes creep in, chilling the space between us. But we faced them together, a father and his son, rebuilding the bridges that had almost burned down. Looking ahead, I know there are still challenges to face and wounds to heal. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. I believe in the possibility of a future where the pain of the past is just a memory, a lesson learned on the path to becoming stronger. As I share this story, I hope it reaches someone who needs to hear it. You're not alone, and there's always a path to healing, no matter how broken the road might seem. Thanks for listening. If this touched you, or you know someone who might benefit from hearing it, please like and subscribe for more stories like this. Hi, I'm Jennifer. Planning a wedding is supposed to be one of the happiest times in a person's life. But for me, a shadow loomed over it, one I wouldn't fully understand until it was almost too late. I was set to marry David, the love of my life. Everything was prepared. The venue, the dress, the vows, all framed against the backdrop of our beautiful hometown. As we finalized the details, my cousin James stepped in to help. Few people knew, but James had once had feelings for me. He even asked me to marry him, promising a life of luxury, knowing that marrying me meant a share of our family's significant inheritance. But his intentions never felt genuine, so I chose David, who I love for his kindness and sincerity, not his wealth. "Jennifer, let me handle the cake and the food arrangements. You focus on being the beautiful bride," James offered, always playing the role of the supportive family member. Yet, something about the way he looked at me didn't quite match his friendly tone. "Thanks, James. I really appreciate it, but are you sure? That's a lot for you to take on," I replied, a little hesitant. "I insist, Jennifer. It's the least I can do. This will be the best wedding our family has ever seen." His words were reassuring, and in the whirlwind of planning, I was grateful for the help. As the big day approached, David and I were excited, ready to start our new life together. Family and friends gathered from near and far to celebrate with us. Everything seemed perfect, almost too perfect. "Babe, are you sure about James handling the catering?" After everything, David asked one evening. "Yeah, he's family. Plus, he's been eager to help. It's nice to see him so involved," I reassured him. But as the wedding day drew closer, James started acting oddly. He seemed overly interested in the guest list and seating arrangements. "Make sure you put me somewhere I can see everything, Jen. I want to make sure it all goes smoothly," he said. "Sure, James. I'll have the planner seat near us," I responded, brushing off the unease that crept in. Looking back, I should have noticed the signs. But I was too caught up in the joyful haze of wedding preparations to see the storm brewing. The morning of the wedding was perfect. The sun was shining, the air was filled with the scent of flowers, and laughter from loved ones echoed around us. I felt like I was living in a dream as I prepared for the ceremony, slipping into my dress and having my makeup done. Meanwhile, James was busy with his own preparations, none of us aware of the sinister nature of his plans. He had volunteered to manage the wedding cake, a stunning three-tiered masterpiece meant to be the centerpiece of the reception. His demeanor was calm, but Mia, one of my bridesmaids, noticed his hands trembling slightly. "Mia, does James seem off to you? He's been hovering around that cake like it's gold," another bridesmaid whispered. "Maybe he's just nervous. It's a big day for all of us," Mia replied, though her doubts lingered. She watched as James meticulously adjusted the cake's placement, his eyes darting around as if to ensure no one was paying too much attention. Satisfied, he stepped back, wiping his brow and offering forced smiles to anyone who approached. As I walked down the aisle, my heart was full of joy, my gaze locked on David. The ceremony was everything we had dreamed of, full of love, laughter, and heartfelt promises. The reception was a blur of happy moments, the cake standing proudly at its center, beautifully adorned with flowers that matched the theme. James mingled with the guests, his smiles a little too wide, his laughter a little too forced. He often glanced at the cake, then at me, his expression darkening for a moment before he smoothed it back into one of familial pride. Maya remained suspicious but decided to keep her thoughts to herself, not wanting to cast a shadow on my special day. Eventually, James approached David and me, raising his glass in a toast. To Jennifer and David, may your life together be as sweet and perfect as this cake we're about to enjoy, he said, his voice dripping with irony only he understood. Little did we know, those words would soon take on a far darker meaning. As the reception continued, the dance floor filled with laughter and love. David and I shared our first dance, lost in each other's eyes, the world around us fading away. Then, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The cutting of the cake. We approached the beautiful dessert, cameras flashing, applause filling the air. We sliced through the cake together, sharing the first piece as a symbol of our new life. But as guests began to eat, the joy quickly turned to confusion. Minutes after the cake was served, I felt a strange churning in my stomach. Glancing around, I saw similar expressions of discomfort on the faces of our guests, David included. "Jen, do you feel okay?" "My stomach. Something's not right," David whispered, concern filling his voice. "I don't feel good either. Let's check on the others." The room buzzed with worry as more guests complained of feeling unwell. Little did we know, James's bitter jealousy had turned our joyous celebration into a nightmare. The celebration quickly turned into chaos as panic spread through the reception hall. Guests stumbled from their seats, some collapsing, their faces pale with fear. Shouts for help echoed through the air, mingling with the clatter of chairs being overturned. Mia, remembering her earlier suspicions, rushed to my side, her face etched with worry. "Jennifer, this can't be a coincidence. Everyone got sick after eating the cake. We need to call for help," she urged. Without hesitation, we called for ambulances. Soon the sound of sirens filled the air, a stark contrast to the wedding bells that had rung just hours before. Paramedics flooded the venue, tending to those most affected, including David and me, as they hurried us to the hospital. Lying on the stretcher, my mind raced, piecing together James' odd behavior, his fixation on the cake, his unease, and his desperation. All signs pointed to a sinister motive born from jealousy. "Check the cake, it might be poisoned." "James," I managed to whisper to the paramedics, my voice weak. They nodded, their professionalism a small comfort in the chaos as we were rushed away. At the hospital, doctors quickly administered treatments for poisoning. Thanks to their swift actions, the antidotes began to work, lessening the effects of whatever toxin had been in the cake. As I lay in the sterile light of the hospital room, surrounded by beeping monitors, the full weight of what had happened sank in. What should have been the best day of my life had become a nightmare. But amidst the turmoil, my resolve strengthened. James would have to answer for what he had done. He had not only endangered David and me, but had also put our entire family and friends at risk. David sat by my side, holding my hand, his face filled with concern and confusion. We were out of immediate danger, but the emotional scars were just beginning to surface. "Jen, what you said about the cake and James, do you really think he could have done this?" His voice trailed off, unable to fully grasp the horror of the situation. "I know it sounds crazy, but remember how he insisted on handling the cake, and how nervous he was. Something wasn't right. We need to talk to the police," I said, my voice firm. David nodded, squeezing my hand before reaching for his phone. The conversation with the authorities was brief, and soon after, detectives arrived at the hospital. Their faces were serious as they took our statements, the gravity of the situation clear to everyone. The investigation moved swiftly. The cake was tested and confirmed to contain traces of a potent toxin. With this evidence in hand, the focus turned to James. He was brought in for questioning, and under the weight of mounting evidence, his denials began to crumble. In a stark interrogation room, the walls closing in on him, James finally broke down. His confession was a volatile mix of anger, justification, and a twisted sense of betrayal. "I loved her. I deserved to be with her, not him. It was supposed to be me," James shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. The detective's voice remained calm but firm. "You poisoned your own cousin and her guests, jeopardized lives, because she didn't love you back." James's face twisted as the full magnitude of his actions began to dawn on him. His plan, driven by jealousy, had spiraled into something far darker. In his mind, if he couldn't have me, no one else should. The confession sealed his fate. He would face serious charges, and the legal consequences would be severe. But it was the personal betrayal that cut the deepest. As David and I sat together, listening to the confession, we were overwhelmed by a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that the truth had come out and sorrow over the family bond that had been shattered beyond repair. James, once someone I trusted, had become a stranger, consumed by greed and jealousy. Back in the hospital room, as David comforted me, we realized that our ordeal was nearing its end. The physical recovery would be swift, but the emotional healing would take much longer. Yet, in that moment, we knew we would face it together, our bond strengthened by the trials we had endured. As the night deepened, our resolve solidified. This was not just about moving past the nightmare, but about ensuring our future was protected from such toxic influences. The hospital room, once a place of anxiety and fear, became a sanctuary for us to plan the next steps in our journey. "Let's do it right this time, Jen," David said softly. "Just us and the people who really matter." I nodded, agreeing wholeheartedly. A small ceremony. No grand spectacle. Just love, joy, and the people we trust. In that quiet moment, we found peace in taking control of our destiny again. We decided on a serene, intimate location, far from the painful memories of what was supposed to be our happiest day. Meanwhile, James would face the consequences of his actions. Although James wasn't prosecuted legally, the fallout from his betrayal was severe. He was excluded from the family and shunned by those who had once considered him kin. In the end, he lost far more than he had bargained for. Stripped of his place in our lives, the respect of his peers, and any affection that could have been salvaged, his fate was sealed. A life marked by isolation and regret. It was a punishment that fit the nature of his crime, meted out not by a court of law, but by the unforgiving gavel of social and familial judgment. As David and I moved forward, we leaned heavily on the support of those who stood by us. Our rescheduled wedding became a symbol of resilience, a beautiful, understated affair that focused on the depth of our love rather than the grandeur of the event. It was perfect, filled with genuine smiles and heartfelt wishes, a stark contrast to the darkness that had tainted our first ceremony. The day of our new wedding arrived bright and clear. As I walked towards David, the sun casting long shadows on the ground, the trials we have faced felt like distant memories. We exchanged vows with a deeper understanding of their weight, promising to protect and cherish each other, no matter what lay ahead. David whispered, "No matter what we face it together." "Always and forever," I replied. In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of those who truly mattered, the lessons of the past months crystallized into one simple truth. Love, when fortified by trust and mutual respect, can weather any storm. James' attempt to destroy us had only strengthened our resolve to build a life defined by the values we cherished. As the celebration continued, laughter and music filled the air, and David and I knew this was just the beginning. A lifetime of shared moments and dreams, each one affirming the enduring strength of our love. James's actions had brought our story to a dramatic climax, but we had transformed adversity into the foundation of a stronger bond. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the social and familial ostracization James faced was a sufficient consequence for his actions, or should there have been legal repercussions despite the personal resolution? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed our journey. Subscribe for more content, and let's continue the conversation.